I think we all have the. Yeah. Great, thanks.
Okay. So thank you so much, Thomas, for inviting us to present today. It's my pleasure to be here to introduce some of the ideas of the activity-centered analysis and design framework together with BIPA. And as you said, you know, like since COVID, everybody is in a different kind of time zone or atmosphere, right? Over here in New Zealand, where I live, it's 8:35 in the evening. And in our COVID situation, we are still not sort of interacting with each other. And when we are in the same room, we are wearing masks all the time. So it's very interesting to see you guys in the same room without masks. Maybe one day we are going to be aspiring for that future. But which brings me to this interesting thing about the design of this very workshop, which I assumed was going to be fully online because this has been my life recently since COVID, right? So I didn't actually think that could be the hybrid mode, but we can talk about that as we talk about the ideas. And one of the other things I just wanted to mention before we start is that people came to help and to be with me because we are thinking of just to be sort of monitoring the groups and going in once we start the workshop. But she's actually like she just had COVID, and so she's still like not talking a lot because she feels quite tired. So I will do most of the talking, and she will sort of be coming with, you know, key moments whenever she feels like. So I will share.
That's fine, Michelle. And to give you an update from Denmark in how, in terms of COVID, we have no restrictions whatsoever. We are not getting tested anymore, so we don't know whether we have COVID, in fact, because it's only if you're pregnant or have any illnesses that you're actually going to be tested. So it's a completely different world at the moment. Yeah.
That's going to be our future, right? So we just look at you and see what we're going towards. It's crazy times. So yeah, like I said, I am working at Massey University in New Zealand, and Pipa is working at the University of Sydney in Australia. But we met quite a few years ago, like now I think 10 years or more even, as we were both working with Peter Goodyear at the University of Sydney, and was the project where the activity-centered analysis and design framework came to be, you know, as first proposed as a framework. And we all have been working together for all these years, so we kind of like have been working in the development of the framework, which is just for in terms of the foundational ideas of the framework. It's based on this idea of teaching as a design science. So not just looking at a framework for learning designers, but a framework for educators, where, you know, teachers or teaching can be seen as some type of design activity. One of the key things is that to think about design, we think about, or when you think about teaching, we think about, you know, the learning objectives and everything that's going to be in place. But we also have this moment of planning of where, as teachers or as the designers, we think about who will do what and when, what tools people are going to be using, with whom they are going to be working, and with the intention of reaching what outcome. So there's all this thought process that goes on before we actually interact with our students. One of the key things about the work that we were doing with Peter Goodyear was this idea of design for learning, which he talks about in this paper with Yanis Dimitriadis. He talks about how design for learning sometimes can seem like an awkward type of expression instead of learning design. But there's a discussion on why the use of design for learning, and that's because the only person who is learning, or who is learning, is the learner. So only the learner can learn. So you cannot design someone else's experience, but you design for someone else's experience. So this is a very important sort of distinction. because it highlights the fact that learning activity is emergent. So it cannot be entirely controlled or predicted. But what you can do is to set the scene or set a structure that will influence what students actually do at learn time. But what they do, although is influenced by designable elements, is still they still have agency to co-create and reconfigure whatever you as an educator has proposed for them to do. So the activity-centered analysis and design framework, we talk about analysis and design because the framework can be used to analyze a learning situation that has already happened, unfolded, or you can use as an input to design. So over here in the workshop, we are going to be talking about in terms of how we can use this structure to consider all the elements that could be being part of learning situation. So we talk about, as educators or as teachers, right, when you are thinking about what you're going to be doing with your students, you are obviously thinking about the learning tasks. So what is it that you're going to propose for your students to do? How we're going to be sequencing and pacing the type of, the knowledge that you want your students to learn about, to interact with. But this is just part of the equation, because you also have all the artifacts, the tools and the resources that you might be bringing to the learning situation. For example, you might make choices whether your students are going to be in a physical space and you're going to be rearranging the furniture in the room, or whether you are going to be doing a session online, if you're going to ask your students to use pen and paper or an iPad. So there's all these elements that we talk about as in terms of set design. And we also have the social design, which is about how we organize our students. So what is it that we, if you want our students to work in pairs or in groups, if you are going to be scaffolding, giving them different roles or division of labors. So all these elements that we make choices about as educators in the period that we are preparing for the session that we are going to have with our students, these choices become a specific configuration of elements that then at learn time, when we are having the moment with our students, they interact with this specific structure, and then they can then reconfigure and rearrange whatever we have proposed. So the idea here that learners have agency, and you might think that they're going to be something, but they might do something else. So what I talked about in terms of the structure over here was at the micro level. So you can look at these ideas in terms of different levels of granularity. So when we are talking about something that we are preparing for our students, like as a lecturer or as a teacher, and I can make choice. I can talk about the choices I make in terms of the tasks that I have planned for the workshop today, or the tools that we are using to make this workshop today. So this is always specific and local, right? But we can also talk about these ideas in terms of the meso level, so the institutional level. For instance, if you're teaching at a university, you would have the mission and the strategies of your university. You would be part of a course that relates to other courses in a degree, and where it's following a particular curriculum. And usually at the universities, you have allocated spaces that you don't necessarily, get to choose too much about what rooms are you going to be teaching. And then at the macro level, we would have yet again different types of scenarios, like the government policies, theories and best practices, wider infrastructure that also affects what actually happens at the micro level. So I can only be here talking to you because there is Wi-Fi and infrastructure that affords, me to be transmitting this lesson today to you that are in a different country, in a different place. So this idea of looking at these different levels of granularity in terms, it comes out of Pippa's PhD in 2015. So she looked at adapting ideas of Christopher Alexander in terms of the different levels of design, looking at how this cross over with the dimensions of the ACAD framework in terms of set design, epistemic design, and social design. So to give you an example of how this kind of could work, let's say that you were a learning designer at a specific university and you were wanting to encourage your lecturers to have sort of implement more sort of active learning within their sort of curriculum. And you suggest, you are working with a particular lecturer and you suggest that this person could do a certain type of activity using a concept map where students would be working in group. But the lecturer has been allocated a particular space within the university, which was a room, and that this room is a lecture theater, which means that the lecturer has to deal with fixed seats. So how is this lecture then going to be kind of conducting group work in a lecture theater where the seats cannot be sort of movable? So it's not what we are looking over here is a sort of a situation where the space or the physical space or the set design is not conducive of the type of social design that this person and task design that this person had sort of planned to be occurring. So we look at that. What this allows us to see is what elements in terms of design are more open to change, that we can sort of change or make slightly change to adapt, and how one dimension can affect the other dimension in different ways. So Pippa and I had been working with like lots of different groups, particularly Pippa because now she's working in a session of the University of Sydney, doing exactly that, like working with lots of lecturers and suggesting, you know, ways that they could be teaching. But much before that, we were looking at how we could share these ideas with other people. And so we came up with this, what is called the ACAD cards, which is was just a way of brainstorming what are the components, what are the sort of elements that could be part of each of these dimensions, and how could we sort of share these ideas with other people. So the ACAD cards have this sort of four decks of cards. So the blue cards are the philosophy or the pedagogy sort of cards that bring terms that are connected to learning theories or to pedagogical values that you would have that would underpin the design. Usually we are using these cards with groups of people when there's, you know, a group, more than one person that is involved in some sort of discussion about education design, and has happened in different ways. Could be people working on a program and you know, like with a colleague trying to working together, or could be at the University of Sydney and also at Massey University. We discussed the design of learning space. So the university were investing some money into developing new infrastructure in new spaces, and so the idea of bringing different people together that would be at Massey University was like the lectures that you use this space is the IT people that think about the technology in this space. So different types of people that can come together to discuss what should be in this space. But so the blue cards may what is important when we are sort of doing these mixed groups of educational designers is that people get into a shared understanding of what is it that they are talking about. And the blue cards act on that. So they are about looking at what are the underlying values in a particular design. So if we talk about networked learning or PBL, for instance, do we mean the same thing? Or, you know, like, are we actually talking about the same thing? So these cards help us sort of bring ideas that we can discuss in terms of these underlying values. And then the yellow cards are about the epistemic design. So it looks at how to structure and pace, learning tasks. The green cards are about set design. So talk about resources and tools that you would have in a particular as part of your design. And the orange cards are about the social design. So how you sort of work with your learners. So pairs, groups, etc. So we have used these cards in many different sort of face-to-face situations, and in Australia, New Zealand, and we have been working with Linda Castaneda in Spain as well, and also other places. And then, with COVID and everything, we sort of had this idea, which was kind of it's being led by Linda in Spain, of doing the ACAD app. And we started design. So you can see the ACAD app mirrors kind of the physical kind of situation, and it has been developed first in Spanish and then in English. And we were sort of planning to work with the app here today in the workshop, but there's quite a few bugs, so we have to sort of adapt a little bit. But I will share the link of the app in the chat in a minute when I finish talking. But and everybody is kind of can go and have a look how it works, but there's a few bugs, so we didn't want to sort of compromise too much for today. But you can see that it basically mirrors what the work that we have been doing, and we adapted for the session today using Jamboard. So I think it's interesting to look at a concrete sort of an example of how these ideas fit together. And so I had planned to talk about the design of our session today, which is very fitting over here because I was not prepared for a hybrid, setting. So, but, like what I had planned was to talk about the different dimensions of design in terms of how I understood the session was going to run. So we had planned that I was going to do an individual presentation, and then we're going to do a group collaboration, which is kind of scaffolded with the ideas of the ACAD. So people will get together and talk about the ideas in small groups. And we had this idea of working in groups because, like it's kind of about sharing ideas and connecting to each other, networked learning, PBL, so sort of kind of a moment to share ideas. And the set design, we have imagined over here that we would be looking at, we need the internet and the Zoom that we are going to meet, the breakout rooms, the PowerPoint. And we had planned initially, we are going to be using the ACAD app and a Padlet where we're going to be sharing ideas. And I also sent some readings prior to the session that you hopefully got. And then what happened was that the ACAD app was not, was having this bug. So we had to sort of redesign the workshop with the Google Jamboard. And then what happens today is we sort of are going to adapt the design for the guys that are in the room, just so that we can also interact with you as we go into the groups. And this is just about having a look in terms at the bottom over here at the different levels of granularity. I don't need to go through all this, but it's just so that you see that at the bottom is what I just talked about. And then you can see that there's the meso level where there's the different institutional settings, and then the different knowledge structures that are informing the design of the workshop today, and the different social elements that come together as well as we design the workshop. So the key points over here is to focus on how key elements in our design influence emergent learning activity, and this idea that involves understanding part-whole relationships at various levels of granularity, micro, meso, and macro, but also looking at what are the dimensions of design that we actually have more control of, that we can sort of change if we needed to. So how can you use potentially these ideas to design, right? So today, what we imagine we are going to be doing is that we're going to be using the breakout rooms in Zoom. And then I suggest that, I don't know how many people are in the room, but depending, you can have 1 or 2 groups. And then the idea is to, initially, we are going to be doing a sort of a design session where you are going to be deciding on a challenge that you're going to be, and we have sort of different scaffolds for that. But the idea initially is to find a common ground. So the group is going to be discussing the underlying assumptions and your pedagogical values in terms of, you know, what you decide to design. So networked learning or PBL principles. Then we are going to be looking at what tasks can you use, or if you are learning designing, what tasks you would like to encourage other people to use. So this could be active learning, collaboration, autonomy, PBL scenarios, etc. Then what resources can you use? I mean, you could even sort of imagine a hybrid session, or, you know, I don't know, whether you want to just do you know, to organize a physical space or a hybrid space, or yeah, just talking about a little bit about the different possibilities. And then same thing with the social design, how you organize, what were you planning to do? Do you want to do a group activity, scripted roles, use for collaboration, or etc. So the idea is that in groups, you're going to be discussing different elements of the design. And all of this is in the Jamboard that we're going to share with you. So, and I will show the link over here. But so as we go into the breakout rooms, just the idea is to introduce yourself, to talk about who you are and who are your students, and then to decide on a challenge that you would have in terms of PBL. So it could be figuring out ways of scaffolding collaboration, or ways of increasing task diversity, or designing equitable assessments. And then if each person in the group brings one challenge that they are imagining, and then the group decides which one is the one that they are going to be working together. So just one of the ideas that are discussed. And the idea is then to work in a way, find ways of addressing that particular challenge, or brainstorming ideas that could address that particular challenge. And we have designed this design space in Jamboard to scaffold the group conversation. So I'm just going to show you. Can you see?
No.
Okay, I have to share the other. So these are just like, as we share the link with you guys, this is just the first page is just the instructions, just what you have to do. And here is the sort of your working space, and the numbers over here is what you have to follow. So you start on the star over here and you finish on the star over here, 1 to 10. So decided what's your design challenge, move on to the high level pedagogical philosophy, then your pedagogical values, who are your learners, etc. Moving on. And over here, you have a library of cards that we selected. You can create your own if you want. That's the ones that we like sort of we're thinking about in relation to the PBL idea today. And you have different sort of options over here. And then the references at the end. Pippa, do you have anything that you would like to say?
I think the idea is, if you imagine what it would be like if we were sharing the room with you, that would always be I love it when we work with people with the real cards. There's a spontaneity and sort of a building a initial confusion that turns into excitement when people start sorting through the cards. So when we're not in the room with you and when we have to be an online space, I'm always conscious that we lose something. But having said that, once you start working in a shared online space, imagine the sticky notes as cards and those suggestions in the reference library as good things to think about, but only a starting point, not you have to have it. Then so have a look at what's there and then create the sticky notes for yourself. In the colors will guide you to put on that, and you can make as big a mess as you want on your shared workspace. But so yes, so think of the sticky notes as cards and use them as prompts for discussion, not finished. Not that you have to pick from there, but it's an encouragement to think about things within each of those dimensions.
All right, I'm just gonna share the link where you can find